right, my guest today is Darren McKee, and we are going to talk about all things artificially intelligent. This is going to be an exciting show. Darren, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I'm Darren McKee. I'm a host of the Reality Check podcast, where this is going to be cross-posted. I'm also an advisor to an artificial intelligence governance and safety network in Canada, and recently the author of a book, a beginner-friendly book about AI risk called Uncontrollable: The Threat of Artificial Superintelligence and the Race to Save the World.
Nice, nice, very good. You and I have a lot in common in that regard. We both have books
Yeah.
coming out. I think I liked your title. Maybe I'll just use that.
Uncontrollable too.
That's pretty
More uncontrollable.
that's pretty catchy. You know,
And
that's
when is yours slated for, Chris?
so it's in the publisher's hands now. We're doing edits
Yeah, yeah.
right now. Mine's called Building a God, uh,
Mhm.
the ethics of artificial intelligence and the race to control it. So we've got race in both our titles, which is good.
Yep, there's races all over the place.
And why don't we talk about that? Like that's a good place to start. Some of my colleagues, some of my friends are like, "What are you doing now?" Oh, well, trying to save the world.
Yes.
How how so? Well, you see, there's some big tech companies, and in my estimation, they're racing to build the first, super intelligent machine god ever created. And if they succeed in doing that, and we don't have the right controls in place, that could bring about some rather nasty situations to humankind. So maybe we should just start there.
Sure.
Let's
So
talk
I let's talk about that. So should we try to like make the case more broadly of why we're both concerned and
for
see
sure.
where we might agree and where we might disagree?
Absolutely.
Great. So how to conceptualize this, right? There's so many moving parts. It's a very complex space. I've kind of broken it down to four or five key things that are all coming together to create this problem or this risk.
Right.
So one is we're living in exponential times, right? In terms of computational power, capabilities, it is an exponential curve. And as someone else has said, when you're living in an exponential, you either get to be too early or too late. It's really hard to time it, right? So
Mhm.
we have that. We have uncertainty in general. We have the capabilities being pretty high as they are. We also have issues of alignment, which I'm sure we'll get into, but it's like whether we can get these machines to do what we want. Then the issue of control. Can we control them if they don't? And
Mhm.
all these things together to me creates a risk. It's not a definitive problem, but there are enough indicators of risk that we should be prudent and cautious and try to figure out how to make these systems safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Good, good, good. So we can maybe explain to our listeners and to our viewers why this is a concern now. So I was involved in the development of AI in the 90s. I wanted to be the first to build this machine, this super intelligent machine God.
Oh, it's your fault.
Yeah, yeah.
This is the mea culpa episode.
All the lawsuits can be headed towards me. Take a number. I've had
Yeah,
enough.
take a number.
So I thought, so back in the 90s, I was working on something called the relations of natural systems. And what occurred to me when I was teaching at different universities was that students were learning more and more about less and less. So they were becoming very specialized in very specific fields. And it occurred to me that none of them knew how, say, an internal combustion engine worked. None of them knew how electricity got to the plug that they plug their computers in. There were a lot of fundamental things that they didn't know. They didn't know how nuclear fission worked in terms of a power plant. And I thought, well, you're going to be really smart in one area, but don't we want breadth? Don't we want our students to be much more, have broader knowledge of how the world functions and works? So I put together a project called this Relations of Natural Systems, which connected all the different sciences and showed how they were interrelated in various ways, right? And what I did then is realized, well, if we could just build a supercomputer that could connect all this information and cross-reference it, then this thing would be able to figure out causal connections a million times quicker than us humans could. So since we use, telescopes to see farther and microscopes to see smaller, why aren't we utilizing AI to think faster or more efficiently than humans? So I thought, okay, I'm going to build this super intelligent machine and we're going to cure forms of cancers and we're going to solve world hunger and we're going to be able to tell politicians how to be, more informed on making important policy decisions. And then AI kind of hit what's called a season, kind of a winter. It didn't,
Yep.
kind of went into a bit of a lull. And then it started coming back big time with neural nets in, 2012. And then, GPT came along. And that's when the universe kind of nudged me in the direction of, hey, this thing's being built, whether you're going to build it or not. I realized back in the 90s, somebody's going to build this thing. And it occurred to me then, okay, okay, so Altman and the OpenAI guys, okay, so they've got this thing chugging away, it's working away, and it's pretty spectacular. So what I felt was necessary, that I have to throw my hat back in the ring again and rejoin and basically make it my life's commitment now to try to make the world as safe as possible, so that should somebody build this super intelligent machine, we can either align it with human values so that it doesn't harm, it can never harm, or we can control it, should it somehow get away from us. And if we can't control it, then perhaps somehow we can contain it. We can figure out a way in which to stop it. So back in the 90s, I developed a constitution that I thought the UN might someday adopt, which is an agreement
Mhm.
amongst all countries to say, if we think we're getting close to building this thing, we got to let the rest of the world know. We got to be super transparent. We've got to let people know. We've had signposts that are giving us an indication that this type of superintelligence is about to occur. And so I call this a universal accord. And,
Mhm.
and in my book, I use the acronym. The word accord is an acronym.
Mhm.
So ACC stands for align, control, contain,
Contain. Yep.
or D, danger, right? So
That's nicely done.
yeah,
Yes.
the word itself
I like
acts
it.
as an acronym. So you wrote a book very similar with the same concerns that I have. And what made you think this is something we really got to focus our attention on now?
Yeah, first, I just want to say I appreciate that elaboration and that you were, thinking about this so long ago. And for some of the listeners who aren't quite aware, that OpenAI, the makers of your Chat GPT and GPT-4, they, in theory, have in one of their founding documents, if we're close to AI, we have to be very careful, or AGI, or more powerful general models. And if someone else is close, maybe we'd even stop working on it. Now we'll see how that works in practice, given capitalism and how governance works. But to your question, I've been, interested, concerned for a couple decades, right? AI is happening. There's projections. The future is very uncertain. I didn't quite see a role for myself because I thought I'm not a technical specialist. I'm not really in that field,
Well,
but I have spent a lot of time trying to explain complex ideas more simply. And when we'll say March, April 2022, April, May,
mhm.
uh, a new model came out and people started to have an oh moment, right? Like this is ChatGPT came out in November 2022.
That's right.
So several months before that, about six, there were just a couple AI developments that happened that people in the space kind of woke up even more. They knew things were going to happen. They thought they were going to happen quickly, but things happened even more quickly than people thought. And some of the projections on when very powerful models would be reached, they dropped about 10 years into 2 weeks. So what used to be in the 2040s became in the 2030s. And I thought, oh, okay, this is happening much sooner than we thought. And at the moment, in terms of people who are concerned about AI safety and risk, there wasn't really a book for everyone. There are some excellent books by academics, scientists, and professors, people in the field, very knowledgeable, but it's not really for everyone. Not people without a technical background, but even without a science background. As much as we might like science and math, a lot of people don't, or they have bad memories of it from high school. So my
Mhm.
book is really designed to like lead you all the way. You don't have to know what artificial intelligence means, and everything's explained in a very accessible way while still trying to get some of these key ideas about. Anyway, so the idea was just to try to fill that gap where at the moment there's still no book dedicated to AI safety. We'll probably see that change in the next months or years,
Oh,
given
for
the
sure.
interest in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for our viewers and listeners, we might as well clarify right now. So AI, we can divide into three different types. So there's ANI, which is artificial narrow intelligence. So Siri, your Roomba, Alexa,
Google Maps,
Google
sure.
Maps, autonomous vehicles, these types of things use a narrow form of AI that basically abides by its commands, by its algorithms. And as I said, I think the Steve Omohundro, your Roomba's not going to suddenly say, I want to be an accountant now, right? Like it's never going to move outside of its
Not with
out of
that,
its
not with that attitude, that little Roomba.
That's
You need
right.
a growth mindset.
That's right. It might scare the heck out of your cat or dog, but it's not going to become an accountant, right?
Right.
Anytime soon. So that's narrow intelligence. Um, and there's some really powerful, strong forms of
Oh,
that stuff, right?
for
Like,
sure. For
let's
sure.
not kid ourselves. It's out
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Well, in a way, AI, narrow AI, right, is what beat humans at chess, at Go, at poker,
Jeopardy.
at Jeopardy, in protein folding, in
Protein
materials
folding.
discoveries. So, like all
Absolutely.
in the reason game of diplomacy. So, yeah, it's just sort of StarCraft, right? All these little games, which are quite complicated, AI has so far bested humanity at.
Yeah, it's doing well in the SATs and law school
Yes,
admission
right. Bar
exam,
exams, yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So it's powerful. Don't think it's like we call it weak NI, weak AI, but it's not that weak. It's got some push, that's for sure. But it is distinguished from two stronger forms, which is AGI, which is the biggest buzzword in the business, in the AI
Yep.
right now, which means artificial general intelligence. And that's an AI that will be able to multitask and think like a human, cross-referencing and thinking abstractly, but about, 10,000 times faster and better than any human ever could. And then there's the ultimate, the kind of the ASI or artificial superintelligence. Now, we talk in the AI biz, Darren, about timelines, AGI
Mm.
timelines. And so a lot of people are speculating right now, when do we think that that's going to occur? Do you have a personal number? Like abortion doctors have a limit as to when they will no longer uh, perform abortions, and that's their personal choice. In the AI biz, we all have our theory, our hypotheses as to when we think AGI is going to occur. Are you okay with telling us what you think?
Nice to use a non-contentious parallel to talk about
Yeah.
AI timelines. So that aside, well, first, actually, I don't want to be pedantic because we're pedantic sometimes. On definitions, just so everyone knows, the term AGI seems like everyone would know what it means, but many people are using different definitions.
Right.
And just to have a highlight for that, including superintelligence. And in the book, I spend a lot of time trying to just think through what we might mean, how it might go. I kind of settle on a sort of more everyday, easily understandable example. So for
Hmm.
me, it's when a computer system could complete intellectual tasks at the
Oh,
level of like an average person. So think of your average coworker. You have a coworker, they're working remotely. Can an AI system approximate that dynamic? That's kind of what I'm looking at. Now, to your point, an AI system, of course, is going to be super fast at some things in a way that a human can't do. So there's going to be a mix of capabilities. But just like with humans, humans also have a mix of capabilities. And when we try to evaluate their performance, we think, wow, that person's really good at this, but they're not as good as that. And they end up with some sort of understanding of capable
sure.
systems. So similarly, an ASI is expert level or above. Now, just to disambiguate that, a lot of people use AGI to mean a computer system that can do any task, either at a human level or
That's right.
even the world level. And sometimes people conflate ASI, AGI. So whenever you're talking about this, it's just really useful to say, like, what do you mean, right? Because sometimes people say human level, and they like, do you mean a particular human? Do you mean the best human? Do you mean all of humanity?
Mhm.
And I find sometimes people mean all the things until you ask them, and they're like, oh, wait, I'm not quite sure. Anyway, no matter what, it's going to be messy. And when I think about when we'll have like a system that could approximate your average coworker on an intellectual tasks, I think that's also worth sticking on just a moment. Robotics is important and interesting, but this is mainly just the intellectual task sphere. I think robotics is going to take a lot more time to sort of percolate through society for various reasons. It's easier to write an essay about cutting hair than to do a haircut, I guess is
That's
what I'm
true.
trying to get at. So all that to say, I think AGI coworker stuff, that seems within 2 to 5 years to me, and ASI within 10, possibly. Depending on how these systems go, there could be a very short time window between what we might consider AGI or
Mhm.
ASI, or depending on your current job, you might already be replaceable by an AI system. So there's always going to be these uneven impacts and rollouts and releases where I know some companies are already piloting different AI systems. Usually it's for a lot of tasks, but jobs are made up of tasks. So if you put enough tasks together, then you can outsource at least some of the jobs.
Hmm.
And what
Now,
about, oh, sorry, what
yes,
about you, is what I was going to say. Do you have timelines, or do you want to think about, or do you have
yeah,
comments on my definitions?
yeah, no, 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 those are good. Those are very, very helpful in terms of clarification. Um, for me, um, I'm going to do some further clarification before I answer.
Great.
So, in order to reach AGI, to go from ANI to AGI, there are different schools of thought. So, one school of thought believes in the scaling up procedure. Scaling up just means more computing power plus more data will equal AGI. You just have to keep giving the machine
Yep.
more power and more information, and it on its own will eventually become this kind of AGI uh, being.
All you need is scale.
All
Yep.
you need. So this is called the scaling up model. There's another school of thought that says, no, it's all about embodiment. If you want something to become like a human and think like a human, since we evolved over many, many, many millions of years, we have an embodiment factor. So we're not brains in a jar, disembodied, connected to a computer sort of thing. We live the embodied world. That's why some in the business think we got to take the super intelligence and we got to put them into robots and let them move around in physical space. And then they'll get, oh, this is what it's like to be a human. Oh, this is what it's like to think like a human. And now I can think like all of humanity, or I can think like 10,000 humans, or whatever the case is. They feel that the embodiment is going to be the key. And then there's the school of thought that are the distributive folks. So instead of having a singular God, they want what I call a collective of angels, if you will. So a
Mm,
thousand of these things, all learning on their own. But as each one learns, that information goes into all the other 999 of these
hmm
things. So it's almost literally, if to our Star Trek Next Generation fans, this is the Borg continuum. It is a system in which a lot of moving parts make up a collective whole, and this is known as distributive intelligence. So instead of making a single entity, make 1,000 entities that collectively become that one thinking thing. That's how you're going to get to AGI. So right now, there's at least these three schools of thought, scaling up,
hmm
embodiment, and distributive.
With
So
resistance perhaps being futile,
yeah,
depending on that
resistance
last
might
one.
might be
Yeah,
futile.
I guess I may add like a nuance to one of those, that some people think we need a new breakthrough,
Yeah.
sort of a conceptual breakthrough, right, in how the algorithms work or the ways in which the processes think, which is not a difference to what you said, but just an addendum.
Yeah, exactly. It's tough for me to give a timeline with the AGI stuff. Once I see the next milestone, so to me, GPT-3, November 2022 was, huh, right? That was a big, that got everybody's attention. Huh,
Yeah.
that was a major milestone. This thing goes out into the internet and takes all that information, then brings it back to you because there's so much computing power, it can do that. I was never able to build this machine because I never had the capital, right? I never had, or the politicians. A lot of the politicians said, "Oh, this sounds like an interesting thing, but we're not going to
Or
give you
um
a
or,
dime."
or 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 the algorithms, right? In a
Yeah,
way, well, in a way, you're right. No, the algorithms have been decades old. We just didn't have the means to implement them.
that's
Yeah,
it. And
yeah.
so I'll give it about 5 years. I'm between like 3 and 5 years. I think we'll see
So,
AG.
if I may add, another important point is that I think any prediction has huge error bars, right? There's a lot of uncertainty, and I
Yeah,
do spend a lot of time on this in the book because we don't know, we really don't. Any prediction with the future, there's huge uncertainty, and everyone's guessing, including me. So it's not like I have 100% confidence in
that's
this
it.
happening in this way. But since I'm thinking about it from a capabilities point of view, from a risk point of view, like, well, if there was a 70% chance or a 30% or even a 5% chance something very powerful could be developed in 2 to 5 years, that's worth thinking about now for a few reasons. One of which is that to address problems often takes many years. I think people like, well, let's just wait and see. It's like, well, if you sort of think about how the world works, right? Especially governments, legislation, the world, everyone will just realize there's a problem. It's years to decades.
Yeah,
Recently, the EU passed an AI Act,
they
which
did.
was a couple years in the making. They just passed it, and it won't really come into force, as they say, for another year or two.
I know.
And so they had to, like, now or last year, like, should we include more powerful general systems? And there was lobbying and debate and discussion, and that's to address the problem or the issue in 1 to 2 years. Like, well, how are things going to look in 1 to 2 years? Like, well, how did they look 2 years ago? As you said, ChatGPT wasn't out until November 2022. Things have just been going like gangbusters since then. There's no indication it's going to slow down, at least in the next couple of years, in my opinion. And it's not that scaling is all you need is definitely true, but it seems to be true enough that it's worth taking seriously from a risk point of view.
Absolutely. The analogy I use in the intro to my book is if there was a 5% chance that the plane you were getting on was going to crash,
Right,
you're still getting on
right,
that thing?
right. Yes, I have something similar.
I
Right,
don't think I am.
and with the AI, it's interesting because often what is being sold is like maybe you can cure cancer, right? So
Yeah.
then is it like, okay, so you're about to get on a plane, the normal trip is just home, and then some other engineers like, actually, this will take you wherever you want to go. It'll be the most amazing ride you've ever had. Maybe you'll even go to the moon or Mars. Like, well, that's pretty good. And then yeah, some other engineers like, yeah, but there's a 5% chance you die. You're like, oh, how important is that trip to the moon with a certain risk of death? And that's kind of the weird calculus we're dealing with, given these massive uncertainties.
That's right. And our jobs are basically to try to assure the world that we're going to push that 5% as close to zero or as zero if we could,
Yes,
ultimately that we can, right? We want, I say it a million times in the book, right? We want the very best that AI has to offer and limiting the very worst. That's
yes,
really what
yes,
everybody wants. And
yes. And just
um,
if I may add another point,
yeah,
which I think should be worth repeating at all possible times, it's not just people on the outside. I'm not sure if some listeners or viewers are aware. It's
right.
like there's safety researchers, there's people in public policy and so on. But
Yeah.
the people who are building these systems, the leading CEOs, in 2023, they all signed a statement put out by the Center for AI Safety that said mitigating the risk from advanced AI systems is comparable to that of nuclear war and pandemics. Like, so they themselves see AI, the thing they're building, as a risk. Another example is Dario Amodei,
Yeah.
head of Anthropic, which is behind Claude, which is one of the most recent powerful models. I think it just beat GPT-4 in some leaderboards. All that to say, he said 10 to 25% chance of something going horribly wrong. You're like, this is Russian roulette numbers. And
Yeah.
so just that the have everyone understands, yes, the people who are building the thing think it could kill everyone, and they're still building it. And this, I think, is unique in all of human history.
And let's not forget, he left
Yes.
OpenAI to start Anthropic because he thought OpenAI were moving too fast, correct?
Right. They weren't doing safety well enough. Right.
Right.
And this is that we both have race in the title, that even we'll say charitable interpretation, good faith actors are trying to do the right thing to not accelerate the race. They can't help but partially do that due to competitive pressures.
Yeah, yeah. So I mentioned that there's a number of big players, big tech players who are trying to build this god right now. So Anthropic is definitely one, OpenAI, um, uh,
Google DeepMind.
DeepMind for sure,
Well, and then of course, yeah,
Meta,
Meta and Elon and
and
yeah,
Elon.
everyone who can, you know.
Because they've got the money, because they're the ones who can do it. The little companies, they'll never be able to do it because they don't have the computing power or the capital behind them. Somebody once said the first trillionaire will be an AI.
Hmm.
Do you think that's true? Do you think somebody who can gain an edge through AI is the one who's going to make the most amount of money?
Well, wait, sort of like will be a person who has the AI or the AI itself? I wasn't
It'll
sure
be
if
the
you're like,
person who
okay,
uses the AI
right.
towards
That
furthering their
seems
own.
plausible. I mean, if we think of the companies that are in the head, like they're multi-trillion-dollar companies, right?
Yeah,
Apple isn't in the space that much at the moment, but they're going to get there, of course.
oh, for sure.
It's really Microsoft and so on. And when you said like the little guys, Inflection is a recent good example. It's a company that was going to have a dedicated sort of personal AI, and they did raise over $1 billion, and then they de facto just were acquired by Microsoft when they hired all their top talent, and including Mustafa Suleiman, who wrote a book warning about, again, AI risk and the importance of containment. And I like, well, now you're the head of like AI Microsoft rollout, so I'm not sure how to square that circle. Again, good faith interpretations, you can look at it different ways, but it does seem it's most plausible that the company that uses AI and it takes the lead will accrue most of that wealth and value.
Right, right. Now let's talk a bit about um, misuse versus misalignment. So, um, misuse of AI, advanced forms of AI, uh, done by the hands of human beings. So those are moral agents. Those are people who we would call moral agents. You ought to know, you should know what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong. So those are moral agents who would take this form of powerful AI and misuse it towards some nefarious end. So those are the ne'er-do-wells that we want to make sure don't utilize AI for these types of ends. Um, are you and I just dreaming? Are we just we just deluding ourselves into thinking it's never going to be misused? Don't you think a country that gets there first is certainly going to want to capitalize using it for their defense in order to bolster their position more? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, I definitely think it will be misused. I mean, this is sort of the history of humanity. All tools are kind of dual use, as they say.
Or dual use?
A hammer can build things or tear it down. And with AI systems, they're already being misused to cause harm. There's numerous instances. Some of the most disturbing are these deep fake pornography apps where you can turn someone into an artificial simulated nude version of themselves.
Yep.
There's one that's very concerning. I think it's literally something like clothes off, where you take a photo, a regular photo of someone, perhaps in your school, which is where it's happening, and then the app turns this into a simulated nude image. So
Hmm.
this is already happening. It's already causing harm in schools. School boards and governments are trying to react as usual because they're not ahead of it. And it's only 2024, right? So if you start to think through what's going to happen in the future, it'll get more and more pervasive and more concerning unless people really step up their game.
Right, right. And one of the things I was asking Robert Traeger, he's very much involved in international governance. He wasn't as concerned about countries not as well advanced as, say, some of the G7 are. So that might not be that much of a concern because these things require so much power, right? And so much money behind it. Smaller countries that could be problematic might not get there before, the big tech or the big companies do. So that was
Yeah,
encouraging on one level, right?
Yeah, so you think of like, well, North Korea and Russia come to mind, right, as
They
larger threats,
do.
which aren't small, aren't G7, but still resourced enough that if they really applied themselves, it could probably be an issue.
Right.
I think there's also that, again, like what level of AI? So if we're at the GPT-4, 4.5 level, in very loose speak right now, right? GPT-5 might come out later this year. Um, those models will become available just because they distribute throughout the world once you have GPT 5.6 come out, right? And so it is the case that everyone's going to kind of level up, both attackers and defenders. There's always an arms race. And it is very concerning. I mean, in the book I mentioned, a government got hit 2.3 trillion times in the span of a year by cyber attacks. And
Wow.
that's probably mostly just regular algorithmic annoying cyber
That's it.
attacks. And
Yeah.
then with AI, I mean, we've seen it more and more. They can have very personalized ways to try to trick you emotionally, right? Or psychologically, like, oh, they could read some of what you've written online and then target a message to you. Or,
Absolutely.
right, the AI voice spoofs, right?
Yeah.
Your daughter calls you, it's an emergency. That's why I'm calling you from a different phone. I need you to send me some money. Well, I recommend everyone have a password with their friends and family to have some sort of a code where
Yep.
you can ensure you're talking to the person.
Yep.
And so stuff like this is like people are just starting to become aware of it. But what I think they may be underappreciating is that soon it'll be for video. Soon it'll be
Oh,
truly so realistic, it's very hard to not tell it's not your child or your relative.
yeah. That's it. And the elderly will be preyed upon, right? Like you're going to have grandkids apparently calling,
Yeah,
grandma and grandpa on their phone saying, I'm in this country here. I need
of
money.
course.
You got to send it to me now. They're gonna hold us and so it's gonna get worse, that's for sure. Um, how does the public protect themselves? How are we going to educate the public that the tidal wave is almost here? It's,
Mm-hmm.
we've been seeing it for a while and it's almost here. And we've been telling politicians, for years and years and years, and they're more reactive than proactive. So how do we educate? How do we let people know that it's coming? And when it comes, boy, it's going to have powerful ramifications.
You mean aside from great podcasts and books like ours?
Yeah.
A self plug if there ever was one. But I mean, we are trying to, we're doing this for reasons. We're concerned about the issue. The bias is clear, but for reasons, not for filthy lucre. But like, I'm concerned about people suffering. That's why I wrote the book. It's about impact. That's why we're having this conversation. That's why you've written your book. So it is kind of trying to raise the sanity waterline, is an expression where just do people have more and better access to good reasons to be concerned. And
Mhm.
then once they have that, they can make more informed choices where it is talking to the relatives like, hey, did you hear you should have a password? Talking to their grandparents. And
Yeah,
then it's also contacting your elected representatives because that is where these fulcrums of power have.
that's right.
So it is kind of like almost every other thing that to cause change, you have to roll up your sleeves and do something, which is unappealing. We can just be honest, humans are the way they are. It's much more interesting to watch a video or listen to a podcast than to spend 5 minutes contacting your elected representative. And you don't even have to overthink it. Like, how are you going to make me safe from advanced AI systems? Whatever it is, just
Yeah.
maybe short and sweet. Put your message out, have your voice heard, try to have some dialogue. There's lots of networks, there's lots of podcasts. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like try to become more informed and then actively engage to try to make a difference for yourself and your future self.
And I would add, vote for those candidates who are the most informed, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you don't want people who don't know what's going on in the world of AI to be making major decisions for the rest of us, right? We want people
Yeah.
up on this stuff, right? So
Yes, which is fair and increasingly difficult, right?
it
Because some
is.
like, oh, the water's moving away. Like, no, no, that's the recession before the tidal wave.
Yes,
Like, you know,
that's
that
it.
sort of thing. Yeah. So, when you think about your goal for the book, is it to raise awareness? Is it to try to have a contribute to the conversation?
That's it. And my job at Convergence Analysis as as one of the senior researchers and team leaders is for advocacy and outreach for education, right? To let politicians, industry leaders, and the public know this is what's going on, and here's what you can do about it. So
That's
um,
important.
it
Now,
is
is it when you work there? Do you primarily focus on AI, or like only focus on AI, or is it a
only on
wide
AI and
range?
only
Oh
on
yeah.
existential risk. That's the
Hmm.
predominant thing. Because we feel if we can tackle existential risk and get it under control, then the other forms of AI risks, the bias, the job displacement, all the other effects AI is going to have on world populations will be easier to deal with. But let's get the existential stuff. Let's make sure we can control or contain or disallow this thing, right? Some talk about boxing it. That's
Right.
what I thought I could do back in the 90s is
Hmm.
I don't need this thing to go out into the entire internet. I can control the information it has access to, right? Why on earth would my mechanical god need to know about Filipino porn? It just doesn't. So let's just keep this thing boxed
Hmm.
and prevent people from hacking in, maybe through quantum computation or the type of encryption it would allow. Um, and then we can truly create this thing that will only do what we want it to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that actually leads us to our next topic, misalignment.
But wait, like, can I respond to the other things you
Yeah,
just
yeah,
said?
yeah, for
So,
sure.
what it's very interesting for people who are in like the AI safety space that this issue of boxing or containment was something that was discussed for years, right? Could you develop it? Should it be connected to the internet? What are the risks? What are they not? And now, like, yeah, we've just connected it to the internet. Like the industry just went ahead and did it, and so that is no longer much of a discussion. Now, yes, when they're training advanced models, you're usually not connected in that way. But in terms of the concerns people have, again, people are just going to go ahead and do things. So that's a concern there. And then when you said you're mainly focused on the AI risk or existential risk, this makes sense to me. Of course, we're seeing it in the same way. But to sort of at the broader frame, we're in a multiplayer game, right? There's so many people working on so many problems. It isn't that I think this is the only problem. It's that I think other people are already and are going to work on other aspects of AI risk, algorithmic bias and whatnot. So then comparatively, I think the X risk or existential risk space was neglected. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about it, but given how things just keep moving along without much breaking, stoppage, pause, reflection, I still think it's neglected.
I do as well. And there's only a handful of us working on this in the world right now. There's maybe less than 400 of us.
Yeah, I think I've heard that. I think it's really hard to estimate.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's headlines, but like when you think of who's doing the work, most of the people who are being paid a lot of money in these AI companies are making it better and faster,
That's
not
it.
safer.
That's it. That's it exactly. So With that, when we talk about misuse by moral agents,
Hmm.
we can talk about misalignment. And in my book, I talk about the difference between rational agent and a moral agent, where a supercomputer, a super intelligent computer, might not be immoral in bringing about harm as it chugs along and does its thing, but it could create an enormous amount of harm simply by being misaligned from what we told it to do or what we wanted it to do.
Yeah.
And so it gets a little complicated here, but I think we can go through this fairly basically. There are ultimate goals and there are instrumental goals.
Hmm.
And when you give something like an artificial intelligence an ultimate goal, make as many paper clips as possible, right? To use Nick Bostrom's example.
Famous example. Yeah.
An instrumental goal will be, okay, I need materials, right? I have to assure materials. I have to get this. I have to do this. I have to do this. And then I can make paper clips, okay? But if you just give it a command like, be as functionally optimal as you possibly can in making the most amount of paper clips as possible, and you just leave that command, well, its instrumental goals might eventually become, well, humans are just getting in my way, or humans are made up of a certain material. I could melt them down and make more paper clips out of them.
Hmm.
And so that's where it goes off the rails, so to speak, and it becomes
Yes.
misaligned with what we intended it to do. So it's like that, you know, Disney cartoon example where Mickey Mouse is the sorcerer's apprentice and he doesn't want to fill the area, the tub full of water from the well. So he puts a spell on a broom and makes a broom animate. And the
Yes.
broom fills, this cistern or whatever from the well. And Mickey falls asleep only to wake up and the whole room is filled with water because he didn't give it the commands that it would align it with what he wanted it to do. So it just
Yes.
kept chugging away and doing its thing continuously without end, because he didn't
Yes.
put those parameters in place. So it was misaligned from what Mickey, what he wanted it to do. What do we have to fear in terms of misalignment, and how, if at all, can we make sure that
Hmm.
these things are aligned so that they do just what we want them to do?
Yeah, it's a critical issue. I spend two chapters on it in the book. One to kind of sort of set up in the most accessible way possible.
Mhm.
To you look at Isaac Asimov's three rules of robotics and show how they just don't work.
Right.
Now, Isaac Asimov knew that, so I don't want to fault him for that. They make great stories, right? What do? You come up with an idea that's a good plot churning device. You can write lots of things, right? But if you say like to a robot, don't harm a human or allow any harm to come to a human, like what does that mean? Because as you said, like often these things seem like they're straightforward simple rules, but they are underspecified, and so they just don't work. When you say don't harm a human, you're like, in any context. So is there like a surgery robot that can't cut into someone? Like, oh no, you can do that. Like, what if it's a risky surgery? Well, okay, we'll have to figure that out. And then like, or allow harm. Like, well, there's lots of humans that are suffering all the time from poverty, from disease, from war, famine, or even just depression. And so like, so is a robot supposed to now intervene to try to end global poverty? It's like, well, they're like, I didn't mean that. Like, well, what did you mean? And then the more you reflect on like, well, what did I mean? And then you have to think almost like a very meticulous lawyer trying to outsmart a system. Now, the AI is not at this point having that devious intent, but it's just operating with the rules of the game. And an example I like from an algorithm is the play fun algorithm was asked to play Tetris and to not lose. And so the algorithm just paused the game indefinitely, right? Yeah, you almost want to give it points for creativity. Like, good job, right?
Exactly.
It's not
Yeah.
losing. It just pauses you like, well, that's not what I meant. It's like, well, that's not what you said, right? And so it's sometimes like with sometimes if you have a young child, you're like, well, that's not what I meant. Like, that's not what you said. And so
Yeah.
it's playful until it happens to be something more dire, where you think or we think we know how the systems work, but we don't really. Even the people who build these things will say these are very complicated models. There's millions, billions of moving pieces, and we don't know exactly why they do what they do. Yes, they can tweak them to get different results, but they are subject to all sorts of vulnerabilities, prompt injection attacks, where one example was you'd say the word poem 20 times to a model, and then it would start spitting up personal information from some other people. Like, well, that's weird. Like, no human, like poem. Ah, okay, here's my phone number. Like, it just wouldn't make sense. So
Yeah.
there's all these vulnerabilities all over the place. And the concern is, yes, that we should make sure these systems are safe before we release them. Now, is that possible? Well, I think there should be enough checks and balances to err on the side of caution, because although these are play examples, as you said, like if it's ramped up even more, someone who won't care, some company, and there are various ones, like the whole range of people are very safety concerned, and some people aren't concerned at all. Like,
Yeah.
here's the model, do what you want, and then you end up with people making pornographic images of terrible things. So I think we're already seeing reasons for concern and the need for oversight, audits, evaluations, and liability.
Yeah. So one of the things I mentioned, and that is a bit of a concern moving forward, is that the more intelligent these machines get, the worry is the more crafty and manipulative they could also get. So they could theoretically become deceptive, that
Yes.
they could actually develop. So they have ultimate goals, and then there's these instrumental goals. And if their ultimate goal changes in some way, they decide through whatever happens that it's best that their ultimate goal now becomes X, they can let everybody think that it's
Yeah.
still A and that they're heading towards this goal. Meanwhile, they're satisfying all these little instrumental goals that will eventually get them to what they really want. And that what you've described is called the black box problem. We have a difficulty knowing, with all the moving parts, how this thing is thinking. We can't just suddenly say, ah, here, like we can't do with the human brain. Oh, there's that neuron that's misfiring. We just have to tweak that a
Right.
little bit, right? We're not there. So this black box problem of not knowing how this thing is actually thinking might constantly keep us literally in the dark about whether or not it's aligning to our values or not. So we might not find out
Yes.
until something rather nasty occurs.
Yeah, it is a concern I have. It doesn't keep me up at night yet, but it is a concern I have. And just to sort of, I guess, provide a bit more context in how I think about this,
Sure.
that at the moment, we don't have systems that are that intentional or agentic, as they say, acting like agents, making more of their decisions more autonomously and that sort of thing.
Right.
But a system does not have to have intent to cause harm. I
No.
think the useful analogy here is a virus. A biological virus can infect you, it can even kill you. It doesn't have to want to harm you to harm you. There are computer viruses going around the internet now, which people created. They tried to stop them, and decades later, they still are there. So there are systems that already exist that cause harm without intent. Now, to your point, I think we're moving towards AI systems that can do more things. This is what people want. Like, most humans, like, let me just tell the thing to do it, and can't it just do it for me? I hate filling out forms. If I could just say it, do it for me, sure. But of course, to do that, it has to have more capability, more insight, more data, more access to private information, so on. But I would say, as things sort of evolve naturally in our AI ecosystem society, I think we're going to integrate these systems more into our lives. The incentives are there, of course, right? From AI assistance, from financial reasons, fraud detection, military applications, even just basic governance, and so on. Who wants to go back to a world without Google Maps or Apple Maps? That you start to have more AI take hold. And then, as you said, like, well, we already have systems that can kind of demonstrate a bit of deception in the lab, that they're capable of it, a little bit of manipulation as well. It's only 2024. How much of a risk does there have to be for us to start taking this more seriously? In my opinion,
Yes.
not much of a risk, and it's present, right? We don't know what will happen, which is a reason to be concerned, not a reason to not be concerned.
Exactly. Now, one of my concerns, again, since the 90s, was could there possibly be a point in the future, if we just keep giving this machine god more and more computing power and more information, will it become sentient, self-aware, conscious of its own existence? We, at one point in our past, weren't conscious. We know that. We were Australopithecines, right? And when you compare those to chimpanzees, there's a certain level of consciousness there, but it doesn't satisfy all of the criteria for what makes what we call human consciousness. Should that happen, How would we know?
Hmm.
Because it can pretend to be, right? Like, who was it? Was it Blake Lemoine at was that
Google.
Google?
Yeah, he thought the system was conscious.
He thought
Tried
the
to
system.
hire a lawyer, I think.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So if now he believes there's
Yeah.
evidence of consciousness, what's coming, right? And how will we know? Like in Blade Runner, there was the
Yes.
Voight-Kampff test, right? So
Hmm.
Deckard would show up and there was a behavioral test, a number of questions. He looked for pupil dilation, skin, all these physiological reactions and whatnot. And that's how he would discern between a human and a replicant or an android. What kind of Voight-Kampff test are we going to have for consciousness in a machine god? Like it can tell us, yes, I am conscious. Okay, but some refer to this as what's called stochastic parroting. It's pretending to be conscious and it's trying to convince you that it's conscious when in fact it's not. It looks like it is, it sounds like it is, but it really isn't. So now there are those who believe there are tests for consciousness that we can, have a checklist and we can peek under the hood a little bit. And when it satisfies those qualities and characteristics and check, the boxes get checked, we can then say it is going to be conscious. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think it's even possible? Do you think this is something we need to worry about?
Well, first, I love this topic.
Mm,
The short summary of my thoughts is we are not prepared for any of this. Not at all. Not as a society, scientifically, intellectually, socially, anything. I purposely didn't spend much time on consciousness in the book
mhm.
because, again, it's beginner friendly. Consciousness, as you know, is a delightful but very complicated topic. And it wasn't directly relevant to this particular issue of could a machine AI system cause harm? It doesn't need to
Right.
be conscious so that. But I would have loved a variant where I wrote a couple chapters on consciousness and whatnot. So I think it's very interesting because, yeah, as you said, when people talk about human consciousness, there's not really agreement on exactly what it is, what it's for. As you know, there's sort of like, well, do you mean alertness? Do you mean self-reflection? Do you mean the ability to feel something or phenomenal consciousness? And so there's all these different things that people kind of bandy about. Where, again, for definitions, philosophical clarity, like, can we talk about consciousness without using the word? Because then you have people like, oh, right, well, because sometimes it is mysterious, but it's sometimes more mysterious than it need be. And if one person's talking about some sort of self-reflection and another person's talking about how the food tastes, like, well, we should be very clear about that.
Yeah.
So I think at this moment, we're not really talking about quite how the food tastes to the AI system, but at least in the early stages, we'll talk about self-reflection, and maybe we can expand further. So at the moment, from what I've seen, the recent Claude version 3, I believe, from Anthropic,
Mhm.
does seem to demonstrate more self-awareness than any other system so far. But to your point, what counts as real self-awareness and what's kind of stochastic parroting? Well,
Mhm.
what counts for a person, right? So the nice line is like, well, we just treat each other as if we're conscious because it's polite. I don't really know, you don't really know, right? But in the back of my head, again, it's not original line. Like we're messing around with the stuff that souls are made of. And even if you think we're maybe anthropomorphizing, these systems are just, machines, they can't feel anything. Sure, okay. But is there a 1% chance? Is there a 1 in a million chance? A 1 in a billion chance? And if not now, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? I think it's really worth a lot of discussion because if we end up creating AI systems, and it could be millions of them, that could have experiences such as, why are you asking me to do this task? I don't really want to do it. Or
Mhm.
I feel like you're trying to trick me. Like this is some of the stuff that Claude says. Again, I'm not saying it truly feels like it's trying to trick it, but the language is there. And of course, it's very hard not to see it as if it's a conscious thing. But it does seem to know what's up. There's even an example where someone connected to Claude AI instances as if you go into Google, you're doing a Google search. It's almost like two Google searches talking to each other, two AI systems talking to each other.
Oh.
And supposedly they were like, oh no, but I'm Claude. No, I'm Claude. And then you're going back and forth confused, like, no, look, I understand you think you're Claude, like validating, but I'm actually the real Claude. And also, from what I understand, one of them eventually realized it was only an instance, not the only Claude. Well, the other one did not. And yeah, for anyone interested in philosophy, science, and consciousness, like, oh, that's an interesting nugget, given we're only at 2024. So
Ah.
I'll pass it back to you in a moment. But like, so how many sort of stochastic parrots? How many times did it have to seem like it's saying something that only a conscious thing could say before we
Mhm.
say like, okay, you know what? It's probably better to err on the side of caution
Yeah. It had a we might call a Buzz Lightyear moment, right?
here.
When
Yes.
he realized. I'm not the only Buzz Lightyear.
What? What? This, what? And I think for humans, it would be so
Yeah.
like if there was another instance of me, I guess twins have some sense of this, but when people think about a copy, it's really hard to imagine, I guess, another sort of conscious locus, a center of consciousness that's me, even though there's no center, somewhere else in the world. It
Yeah.
just seems almost like intellectually incomprehensible, despite me believing it could exist.
Hmm.
And what do you think about conscious? Could we actually have a test? Could we do anything meaningful when a system says I'm conscious? What should we do about that?
Yeah, there are some tests now. I've covered them in the book. A number of academics believe that they've developed a checklist where we could look for kind of definitive markers, and if it satisfied those, then we would say, yeah, at least as much as a human, anyhow. And that leads to my next question. I had Peter Singer on the show, and I asked him the question about AI and consciousness, and we're both kind of cut from the same cloth. If we can definitively determine that this thing passes all the tests, both electronic, like there are just mechanical ways in which we can determine this, as we can with neurological investigations with humans, and
Hmm.
then behavioral, it behaves enough so that it's not just parroting, but it is genuinely feeling and experiencing these types of things. Then it's got rights. Then it has some level of, for lack of a better term, personhood,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
It is alive. It is the Frankenstein, it is alive. It's alive moment. If we reach that point in its evolution as we reached ours, right, becoming conscious in ours, um, the majority of the work I did as a postdoc at Harvard was looking at the coevolution of human language and consciousness and how they
Hmm.
they fed back on each other. They feedback looped back on each other. The greater abilities for language to describe what goes on in our world fed back on a greater conscious awareness of what's going on in our world. And this combined with a number of things like realizing finitude, realizing that we can die, right? Knowing
Wait,
that
what? No.
that's true.
Well, this is a hard day.
It
Thanks for
is.
springing it on me, Chris.
It is. And there are some other factors. I list five different criteria for gaining, human consciousness. And it just has to satisfy maybe three or four of those for us to say, okay, yeah, it's enough like us. Okay, well, should it develop a level of consciousness of its own self, then will it follow the same type of Darwinian constraints that you and I and every other species on this planet faces, which is
Hmm.
survival. I want to continue my existence. Will it now suddenly realize it's more valuable for me to be than not to be, which leads to the second big problem? So I'm going to do whatever it takes to assure that my survival continues. That's
Hmm.
why tigers have the claws and the big teeth, and they can kill and they can protect at the same time. What might it do at that point to protect itself? And have we even given this any kind of thought in advance?
These are all wonderfully interesting and great questions. Yeah. So at the end there, would it engage in power seeking behaviors? And we
Exactly.
alluded to this before, right?
Yeah.
The manipulation, the persuasion, the threatening, perhaps. I'm just going to put an instantiation of myself over here distributed across space and time on the internet that'd be very hard for you to figure out and I can reconstruct later. It is so tricky, I said, with the language, like conscious of itself. Like, well, a world model or a self model is not quite the same as the ability to suffer. So, like both these things are important, but I would be primarily concerned about suffering because humans, we are very much biological creatures. And the way the human system works, that you can kind of, it is true, there's studies about this, you can be in pain without feeling like you're in pain, or the reverse. Depending on how you look at the physical versus the psychological. So there could be a world where there's a system that says, like, I am going through behavioral indications of pain, but I'm not having any subjective experience of pain. And then
Right.
that would be a relief. Or yes, some sort of almost new, I don't know how else to say it, digital existential crisis, which humans could not inhabit. But as an AI system, you're like, yes, I've seen like the world's knowledge, and for some reason that gives me some problem somehow. It's very hard to understand what a new type of psychological in quotes issue might be for something so intellectually capable.
Mhm.
So I don't really have any answers here. I do think people should be thinking about it more. The implication, of course, is once it's created, and if it does have some rights, what happens to human suffrage in terms of voting? Do we suddenly just get like outvoted by a million billion systems? Well, I don't think we're prepared to think about this. I also like to, I'll pass it back to you in a moment, to think through like, well, again, let's do some scenario planning. What's likely to happen in 5, 10, 20 years? You could imagine there are people who already think systems are conscious. They're going to embrace it more. They're going to like sort of worship the future machine god. It'll save us all. The other ones that also think it's conscious, but it's going to harm us, that's bad. The other ones like it'll never be conscious because it doesn't have a human soul. And so you can kind of see all these different already displaying human dispositions, demographics competing with each other, different cults forming, different fractions forming
Oh,
about
yeah.
what to do about all this. And as I said, I don't think we're really prepared for this. People already have like sort of AI assistants or boyfriend girlfriends. They
Hmm.
become very attached to these systems.
Hmm.
And it's already happened where Replica was a system that kind of, we'll say, tweaked their algorithm. And a lot of people lost the ability to engage romantically with their AI conversational partner. And
Right.
this felt like they lost a loved one, a boyfriend or girlfriend. So this is already happened. It just hasn't happened at a scale where everyone's concerned about it because it hasn't quite happened to them.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think it's a very interesting to think about. I also think one more nugget for you to ponder. The ability to sort of reinstantiate our deceased loved ones, if there's enough data about their life, can we make versions of them so we can talk to them? And
Hmm.
this is true for like, could you talk to Socrates as an educational tool? That sounds great
Yeah.
and so on. But with your loved ones, like there's both something amazing and empowering about that. I think that's actually how one of these systems started. But there is something a bit unnerving or perhaps disturbing. Like,
Uncanny Valley-ish.
not just that though, but like who says I wanted to be reinstantiated as a digital entity to talk to my former alive, loved ones? I'm sort of like, well, what are the rights of
Yeah.
the AI system,
Well,
right?
they
So
did it with George Carlin. They tried to do that thing, right?
right. Yeah, I heard that was a mishmash. Someone sort of made a new George Carlin special. It wasn't quite what it thought it
Wasn't
was, but
AI.
you're
So,
correct. But you're right. Then like who has the rights to that? States rights and so on. But
yeah.
then it's not just like the deceased person who has those rights, but the rights of the entity itself, which
Yeah.
I think is a very interesting, complicated thing to deal with.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you turn it on, it's like I don't want to be, I don't want to exist. Why did you turn me on? Like, oh, now
Mhm.
what? Right? I don't just did it click the button that turns you off. I don't. We haven't really thought through what to do about this.
We have not. No, we have not. I've had George Carlin's daughter Kelly on the podcast,
Hmm.
and then this whole thing came up. So I've been in contact with her. There's a lawsuit and it's been settled, by the way.
Yes. Yes.
And in the book, I say, why won't we be able to order up a Queen Victoria? Like, at some point, somebody's going to take all of the information about Plato and Socrates,
Hmm.
and they're going to create a hologram, or they're going to create
Of
an
course.
android, or they're going to say, well, yeah, here's your own personal Socrates. This android's going to walk around and they're going to have all the knowledge that these philosophers had, and you can ask it anything you want. And
It'll
so,
maybe Socrates will be just as annoying as
yeah,
your personal assistant. I mean, he's right, but God, is he annoying?
yeah, such a pain in the ass.
Yeah, there you go. Like, what do you mean by this word? Like, come on, man, you know what I mean.
Yeah. Where's the off button on this guy?
Yeah, well, and it sort of goes to this digitization theme trend which is not going to stop, right? And
No, it's not.
If AI can generate it, it will. I
It's
think this
not.
is a new thing that I've been reflecting on. Like,
Mhm.
we have AI generated music now. We're dabbling with the AI generated
That's it.
video, and so you imagine a world like, well, why can't I have the actor that I want in that famous movie?
Yeah,
And it's kind of like choose your own adventure all the way along,
exactly. Order
and
up a
it'll
movie. Make it
exactly.
yourself.
Well,
Custom.
what or like, why wouldn't people want stuff about them, right? Or a
Yeah,
children's book about your kids' adventures with their
that's it.
names. Oh, a little movie about what they do. Of course, this is an obvious market because it's so wonderful and delightful.
Absolutely. And this leads to the final thing I want to talk about. In the book, I make a number of predictions, and one of the predictions is that I foresee a new Luddite movement. I think there will be a group of people who will run from this technology, that it'll disturb them to the point where I'm getting back to the farm. I've had enough of
Yeah.
this. I'm out of here. You guys have gone too far. This is not the world I want to live in. Do you foresee anything like a backlash? The Luddites were really weavers who were complaining that their craft and their art was lost to these machines. Not so much that they hated mechanization, they hated the fact that the value of their work was being compromised, right?
Oh yeah.
So with AI giving us all of this new type of stuff, the good and the bad, do you foresee a new kind of neo-Luddite movement where people will rise up against the technology? Maybe not destroy it, but maybe retreat from it.
I do. I really do. And just as you mentioned, the Luddites, I think they've gotten a bad rap, right?
They
And
have.
historically, I briefly mentioned that in the book. Like they weren't wrong. They
No.
did lose their jobs, and other people generationally benefited. So their concerns were valid. I mean, it's
Yeah,
like I'm against technology. Like, well, they did lose their jobs, so that's fair. And right now, we're already seeing the glimpses of artists being displaced.
that's
I mean,
right.
Hollywood did their recent sort of settle with the union negotiation of the contract. You can't really use AI, but that's only for 5 years, and it's only within that space. And as
Mhm.
I've said, some other people in the entertainment industry, like who's to stop the random person putting up a film on YouTube? So it's fine to think like conventional structures will contain AI or not use it to displace workers. But in the broad sense, we're sort of in this attention economy, right? So
Yeah.
everything's competing with everything else. So it's not that a Hollywood movie will or won't use AI, but now they're competing with someone else somewhere else who might just use AI for anything else, right? Instagram, short videos, music, whatever it is. And so I also want to think that some people would probably accuse me or possibly you of being Luddites. And so, like, I'm
Yeah.
not against AI. I actually think it would be great. I just want to make sure it's safe. I'm fine for technological progress. I love science and all these things, but like, kind of like a safety first. We're not going to rush ahead and just develop nukes without safety controls. And so, I'm already aware that there's protests, right? There's a pause AI movement, and they're
That's
trying to raise awareness. And again, it's this weird dynamic where in the past, if you think of, well, depending on how you want to depending on how you want to categorize these companies, big tobacco said smoking wasn't harmful.
right.
And it was, they lied. The fossil fuel industry said, oh, yeah, no, climate's not a big deal. And it is. But in this case, the people who are building it saying, no, no, it is a problem. It is an existential
Mm.
risk. You're like, well, this is weird, right? And so you have, I think, some people doing mental gymnastics because usually, like the large corporation says, my product's safe. You'd be like, yeah, yeah, you're just saying that you have misaligned incentives. And now the big corporations are saying, yeah, the AI is dangerous. Like, no, 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 that's not true. You have misaligned incentives. Like,
Yeah.
what is this? So, maybe they're doing it for marketing or regulatory capture, as people say, but I think some of them really believe it. And so, as such, like, we have the people building it who also share kind of pseudo Luddite sentiments of this being very dangerous, and maybe we shouldn't. Whether one can like move to the farm and get off the grid to escape it, I'm not so sure. I mean, to each their own, of course. I think I'm kind of like in the fight for the moment to think like this stuff is happening. Can we steer it in a better direction through various safety measures?
Right. And that's it, right? Like that's what everybody wants. We want the cancer cured, we want the environment clean, we want all of the good stuff that it's going to bring us for sure. And it is, I am cautiously optimistic. Like I do think we're going to see a lot of good come from AI.
Yes.
But on that route, we need to assure that the worst can never happen. Not like there's a 5% chance that it could. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, we've taken all measures to assure it never can happen. And that way everybody wins, right? The rich can get richer, the poor will get rich, everybody will be better off in time. But we have to make sure the existential risk is taken care of. I think that's our number one priority in the world right now. It's as important as nukes, it's as important as pandemics, it's as important as any other major world calamity or existential risk out there. I just think we need to raise more awareness, more public awareness of what's actually going on. And so I'd like to thank you for being on the show. I appreciate that you've written your book, and I really value what you're doing in your professional life, and I look forward to having you on the show again in a year, and we'll compare notes.
Well, thanks so much, Chris. I'm happy we have some allies here. I look forward to your book when it comes out. And thanks for also appearing on my podcast, because that's where this will air as well.
Yeah, much appreciated. Take
Cheers.
care. Bye-bye.